He locked her out of a house in her name, with kids inside. What is he hiding?
He slid the deadbolt and pushed my hands off the door. Then he gave my house keys to her. I was standing on my own front porch, barefoot, staring through the glass as my kids ran toward the door, confused, calling for me while my husband stood inside with another woman like I didn't exist. "This is her house now," he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The house was in my name, always had been. I paid for it. I signed every paper. And somehow, he was locking me out while my children were still inside. I didn't scream. I didn't bang on the door. I just stepped back and said, "Go ahead." That's when a police cruiser pulled up and the officer looked at me, then at him and said, "Ma'am, did you already report this?" He didn't answer the officer right away. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Marcus just stood there, one hand still resting on the door, like he owned it, like he had every right to decide who came in and who stayed out. Danielle stood half a step behind him, clutching the keys he had just given her. Her fingers curled tight around them like they meant something. I looked at the officer. "Yes," I said calmly. "About 20 minutes ago." The officer's eyes flicked between us, then past Marcus, into the house. My son Lucas was right there in the hallway, staring out through the glass, his small hand pressed flat against it. Maya was behind him, crying, her voice muffled but unmistakable. "Mom!" Lucas yelled. "Why can't you come in?" My chest tightened, but my face didn't change. I kept my voice even. "It's okay, baby. Stay right there." Marcus shifted, trying to block the view. "This is a private family matter," he said quickly. "She doesn't live here anymore." That was the first lie he said out loud in front of someone official. The officer frowned slightly. "Sir, I need to understand what's going on." "I already told you," Marcus said, sharper now. "She left. She's been unstable. I changed the locks for the kids' safety." Danielle nodded beside him, like she'd rehearsed that line. "He's just trying to keep things calm." I let a small breath out through my nose. Not a laugh, just enough to feel the moment settle exactly where I needed it. Unstable. That was the story he was going with. I shifted my weight on the cold concrete, finally lowering my phone from my ear. The call had already ended. It had been short, precise, timed. The officer looked back at me. "Ma'am, is this your residence?" "Yes," I said. No hesitation, no emotion, just a fact. "My name is on the deed, solely." Marcus scoffed immediately. "That's not true." But he didn't sound as confident as he had 30 seconds ago. The officer picked up on that. "Do you have ID?" I handed it over. My fingers were steady. I'd already gone through the part where they weren't. Behind the officer, I could see Mrs. Langley from next door standing on her porch, pretending to water her plants while watching everything. Across the street, someone had their phone up, recording. The quiet of the neighborhood had turned sharp, alert, like everyone knew something was wrong but didn't know how far it went. Inside, Danielle took a cautious step further into the house, like she was testing how much space she could claim. She set her bag down on the entry table. My table. Marcus didn't stop her. That was the moment Lucas tried the door handle from the inside. It didn't budge. He looked up at Marcus, confused. "Dad, why is it locked?" Marcus crouched slightly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's okay, buddy. Just stay inside, all right?" Lucas didn't move. He looked back at me, then at the officer, then back at the door. Something about that silence, his silence, hung heavier than anything Marcus was saying. The officer handed my ID back slowly. "Sir," he said, more firmly now, "if this is her legal residence, you can't just lock her out." "It's my house too," Marcus snapped. "We're married." There it was, the claim. The angle he thought made everything simple. I tilted my head slightly, watching him, letting him keep talking. "And she's not allowed in right now," he added, doubling down. "I made that decision." "You made that decision," I repeated quietly, just loud enough for the officer to hear. Danielle shifted again, her grip tightening on the keys. For the first time, she looked at me directly. Not smug, not confident. Careful. Like she was starting to realize this wasn't unfolding the way she expected. The officer exhaled slowly. "Ma'am, when you called, what exactly did you report?" I met his eyes. "That I was being locked out of my own home," I said, "while my minor children were still inside." The words landed differently this time. He glanced back at the door again, at Lucas, at Maya. Marcus stepped forward, irritation bleeding through now. "You're making this into something it's not." "No." I said softly. You already did that. There was a pause, a long one. And then from somewhere down the street, another vehicle turned the corner. Not a police car. Something else. I didn't look at it right away. I kept my eyes on Marcus as the sound of the engine got closer and closer until it slowed right in front of the house. Marcus noticed it too. His expression flickered just for a second. That was the first crack. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a single step off the porch, giving the arriving vehicle a clear path. Perfect timing, I said under my breath. The engine cut. A door opened, and Marcus, still holding on to the illusion that he was in control, asked the one question he shouldn't have. What did you do? 3 weeks earlier, nothing had exploded yet, but something had already shifted. It started small, quiet enough that if I hadn't been paying attention, I might have missed it entirely. Marcus had always been the kind of man who filled space talking, moving, making decisions, like everything naturally revolved around him, but suddenly he was careful, quieter. Not distant in the obvious way. He was still there, still present, but there was a layer between us that hadn't existed before. Did you pay the property taxes already? He asked one night, standing in the kitchen while I was rinsing dishes. I didn't even turn around. I always do. I know, he hesitated, wanted to be sure. That pause stuck with me. Marcus didn't just want to be sure about things I handled, not after 10 years. I dried my hands and turned to look at him. Why? Because it matters, he said quickly, shrugging it off. It's the house. The way he said it, the house felt different, like he was testing how the words sounded coming out of his mouth. I let it go. Outwardly. But later that night, after he fell asleep, I opened my laptop and logged into the county property records. Everything was exactly how it had always been. My name, my signature, my ownership. Clean. Unchanged. Still, the question didn't sit right. A few days later, I noticed the folder. It was supposed to be in the hallway cabinet. Everything important went there. Deed copies, insurance documents, tax records. I reached for it automatically, and for a second, my hand just hovered over empty space. Then I found it on Marcus's side of the closet. That alone wasn't enough to accuse him of anything, but when I opened it, the papers weren't in the same order. Subtle, almost unnoticeable. That night at dinner, I watched him differently. Lucas was talking about school, Maya was trying to show him a drawing, and Marcus nodded along, but his phone kept lighting up beside his plate. He flipped it over every time. Who keeps texting you? I asked casually. Work, he said without looking up. Since when does work text you at 8 p.m.? He gave a small, tight smile. Since always. You just never noticed. That wasn't true. I noticed everything. I didn't push. Not yet. 2 days later, I did something I hadn't done in years. I checked his phone. Not openly. Not confrontationally. Just when he left it on the counter while he went upstairs. The messages weren't obvious. No saved name like Danielle or anything careless like that. It was under a contact labeled D. Green. But the tone gave it away immediately. Short messages, coordinated timing, phrases that didn't belong in professional conversations. She doesn't know. Soon. We'll go over it again. My thumb hovered over the screen, then I opened the contact. No profile picture, no full name, but there was one photo in the thread, a blurred image sent earlier that day. I tapped it. Marcus, standing outside a building I didn't recognize. And next to him, her. She wasn't touching him, not in the photo, but she stood close enough that she didn't need to. I locked the phone and set it back exactly where it had been. When Marcus came back downstairs, I was sitting on the couch like nothing had changed. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, meeting his eyes. Everything's fine. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started watching. A week later, the email came. Not to him. To me, subject line, property consultation confirmation. I almost deleted it thinking it was spam, but something made me open it. It was addressed to both of us. Scheduled appointment, real estate attorney, date and time already set. I stared at the screen, reading it twice. Then a third time, I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't even been asked. That night, I printed the email and placed it back on the desk, exactly where he'd see it. Marcus walked in, glanced at it, and froze. Just for a second. Did you schedule this? I asked. He recovered quickly. Too quickly. Yeah, just exploring options. Thought it'd be smart. Without telling me? I was going to. That answer sat between us, thin and brittle. I nodded slowly, like I accepted it. But inside, something locked into place. Because this wasn't about exploring options. This was about positioning. And whatever he thought he was building, it didn't include me. 2 days later, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cancel the appointment. I was going to show up. And I wasn't going to tell him. Because I needed to see exactly how far he was willing to go. And who he was planning to do it with. I didn't knock before walking into the attorney's office. Marcus was already seated at the conference table when I stepped in mid-sentence, leaning forward, confident. And across from him sat the same woman from the photo. Danielle. She looked up first. Recognition flashed across her face, quick and sharp, like she hadn't expected to see me this soon. Marcus turned a second later, and whatever he had been about to say died in his throat. Elena, he said, forcing a smile that didn't land. I was just about to call you. I got the email, I replied, closing the door behind me. My voice stayed level. Figured I'd save you the trouble. The attorney, a man in his 50s with a neatly arranged desk and a cautious expression, cleared his throat. You must be Mrs. Vargas. Please, have a seat. I will, I said, pulling out the chair beside Marcus, not across from him. That mattered. I sat down, placing my bag on the table, my eyes briefly scanning the documents spread in front of them. Some of them I recognized, some of them I didn't. And some didn't look right. Marcus leaned back slightly, trying to regain control. This is Danielle, he said. She's helping us go over some property options. Danielle gave a polite nod. Nice to finally meet you. Finally. I held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then shifted my attention to the attorney. Can you walk me through what exactly is being discussed? The attorney hesitated just slightly. Your husband expressed interest in reviewing potential restructuring of property ownership. There were indications that both parties were in agreement. I never agreed to anything, I said, cutting in cleanly. Silent. Marcus exhaled like I was being difficult. We talked about it. No, I said. You talked around it. That landed harder than anything louder would have. The attorney adjusted his glasses, looking down at the documents. Mr. Vargas provided preliminary paperwork suggesting shared marital interest in the property. However, I did note some inconsistencies that required clarification before proceeding. Inconsistencies, I repeated, letting the word hang. Danielle shifted in her seat. Marcus leaned forward again, pushing a set of papers slightly toward me. It's just standard. Marriage creates shared assets. We're just formalizing what's already implied. I looked down at the page. My name was there, but the formatting was wrong. The signature line, my signature was close. Close enough that someone glancing quickly might not question it. But I knew my own hand. The curve was off. The spacing was wrong. It wasn't mine. I lifted the page slowly. Where did this come from? Marcus didn't hesitate. You signed it. A while ago. No, I said quietly. I didn't. The room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but something in the air tightened. The attorney leaned forward, his tone more careful now. Mr. Vargas, I did express concern about the authenticity of certain documents. That's why we hadn't moved forward. Marcus's jaw tightened. It's not a big deal. We're married. This is just paperwork catching up. No, I said again, this time looking directly at the attorney. This is someone trying to create ownership that doesn't exist. Danielle finally spoke, her voice measured. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There hasn't, I cut in, not raising my voice. I own the house, solely. Before the marriage, during the marriage, and right now. Marcus let out a short, irritated laugh. You're acting like I'm trying to steal something. I didn't respond to him. Instead, I turned to the attorney. I'd like copies of everything he's submitted. Every document, every request. The attorney nodded immediately. Of course. Marcus shifted in his chair. Elena, you're overreacting. That was the word he chose. Overreacting. I stood up slowly, gathering the papers the attorney handed me. No, I said, finally looking back at him. I'm paying attention. For the first time since I walked in, Marcus didn't have a response ready. Danielle glanced between us, her confidence thinning just slightly. I walked to the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. Without turning around, I said, you should be careful what you try to make official. Marcus scoffed. Why? What are you going to do? I opened the door, and then I answered, calm and precise. Nothing you'll see coming. And I walked out, already pulling out my phone to make a call. Because in that room, one thing had become completely clear. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a case. The sound of that second car door closing snapped everything tighter. Back on the porch, in the present, Marcus straightened instinctively, like he needed to reassert control before whoever stepped out reached the walkway. I didn't turn immediately. I kept my eyes on him, because this exact moment was the one he thought he'd already won. Ma'am, the officer said to me, quieter now. Who's arriving? You'll see, I replied. Behind him, Danielle shifted again, her earlier confidence thinning into something more alert. She glanced past Marcus, toward the curb, then back at me, trying to read something in my face and not finding it. Marcus exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You're turning this into a scene. A scene? I repeated softly. You locked me out of my own house with my children inside. They're fine, he snapped. They're with me. Inside, Lucas hadn't moved from the door. His hand was still pressed against the glass, eyes flicking between us and whatever was happening behind me. Maya clung to his arm, quieter now, but still shaken. The second officer stepped out of the newly arrived vehicle. Not patrol. Different uniform. And he wasn't alone. A woman followed him mid-40s, composed, carrying a slim folder under her arm. Marcus noticed that detail. His expression tightened. Who is that? He asked, more to himself than anyone else. I finally turned. Someone who deals with paperwork, I said. That wasn't the full truth, but it was enough. The first officer glanced between all of us, tension settling into his posture. Sir, he said to Marcus, I'm going to need you to step outside so we can sort this properly. I'm not leaving my house, Marcus replied immediately. There it was again. My house. Claimed like repetition could make it real. The second officer approached, calm but firm. We're not asking you to leave permanently. Just step outside while we clarify a few things. Danielle touched Marcus's arm lightly. Maybe you should just... I've got it, he cut her off. But his voice had shifted, not confident anymore, controlled but thinner. He opened the door halfway, stepping just onto the threshold, careful not to fully leave, like that line still mattered. I'm right here, he said. Let's talk. The woman with the folder stopped a few feet from the porch and looked directly at me. Miss Vargas? She asked. Yes. She gave a small nod, then turned to the officers. I was contacted regarding a reported unlawful exclusion involving minor occupants and a registered property holder. The words were precise, clinical, but they landed hard. Marcus blinked. Unlawful what? The first officer's posture shifted immediately. Sir, I'm going to need you to clarify something, he said. Did you change the locks today? Marcus hesitated. Just for a second. Yes. And you're preventing her from entering? She doesn't live here anymore. The woman opened her folder. No formal change of residence has been filed, she said, and the property remains solely under Miss Vargas's name. Danielle took a step back. Not dramatic, not obvious, but enough. Marcus shook his head, frustration rising. We're married. That makes it shared. It complicates things, the woman replied evenly. It doesn't transfer ownership. Silence stretched. I watched Marcus carefully. Because now, for the first time, he wasn't performing. He was calculating, trying to figure out where this had slipped out of his control. The first officer glanced toward the door again. Your children are inside, he said, and their mother is being denied access. They're safe, Marcus insisted. That's not the question, the officer replied. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Marcus exhaled, running a hand through his hair, irritation bleeding through. Fine, we'll sort it out later. She can come in tomorrow. Tomorrow. Like this was a scheduling issue. Like he still had the authority to decide. I tilted my head slightly, meeting his eyes through the doorway. And then I said very quietly, you shouldn't have done this while they were inside. He frowned. What is that supposed to mean? I didn't answer him. Instead, I pulled my phone out again. The screen lit up instantly. A message. Short, confirmed. I looked back up at him, holding his gaze this time. And for the first time since this started, I let something show a crack. Not of fear, but certainty. It means, I said, you just made this a lot bigger than you think. Marcus's jaw tightened. Elena, what did you do? I didn't raise my voice. Didn't step forward. Didn't need to. Because the shift had already happened. Nothing, I said calmly. A beat. Then, I just let you finish it. The shift didn't happen all at once. It was quieter than that. But once it started, it didn't stop. The first officer stepped back slightly, speaking into his radio in a lower tone. The second officer stayed focused on Marcus, watching him more carefully now, not like a man handling a routine domestic call, but like someone reassessing the situation in real time. The woman with the folder, Miss Klein, as she introduced herself, flipped to a marked page and handed it to the officer. I'll need that noted, she said. There's already a filed alert connected to this property. Marcus frowned. What alert? No one answered him immediately. That was the first moment he wasn't in the conversation anymore, just reacting to it. The officer scanned the document, then looked back at Marcus. Sir, were you aware there's an active fraud precaution attached to this address? Marcus blinked. That doesn't make any sense. It does, I said quietly. He looked at me sharply. You did this? I protected what's mine, I replied. Miss Klein continued, her tone steady. There was a report filed regarding suspected attempts to establish unauthorized claims on the property. Documentation was reviewed. Irregularities were noted. Danielle's grip on the keys loosened. I could hear it, the faint jingle, as her fingers shifted. Marcus shook his head, trying to regain footing. This is being twisted. We were just attempting to formalize ownership, Miss Klein finished for him. Using documentation that does not match verified signatures? Silence. Not just outside. Inside the house, too. Even Lucas had stopped knocking on the glass. He was just watching now. Marcus exhaled hard. It's not fraud. We're married. And yet, she said, ownership remained unchanged, which makes any attempt to alter it without verified consent a legal issue. The first officer lowered the paper slowly. Sir, I need you to understand something clearly. Locking a legal homeowner out of their primary residence while their minor children are inside escalates this beyond a civil disagreement. That word landed. Escalates. Marcus's confidence didn't just crack this time, it shifted into something else. Defensive. You're acting like I did something criminal, he said. No one rushed to correct him. Because now the weight of what he'd done was catching up piece by piece. Not all at once, but enough. I stepped forward, just one step, onto the edge of the porch. Open the door, Marcus. He looked at me. Really looked this time. Not like I was overreacting. Not like I was emotional. But like he was finally trying to figure out what I had already set in motion. You planned this, he said under his breath. I didn't deny it. I prepared, I replied. Another pause. Then the officer spoke again, firmer now. Sir, open the door. Marcus hesitated. Then, slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back and pulled it open. The click of the lock echoed louder than it should have. I walked past him without touching him, without looking at Danielle, without stopping. Lucas moved first, throwing his arms around me the second I crossed the threshold. Maya followed, burying her face into my side. I'm right here, I said softly, kneeling down, pulling them both in. I'm not going anywhere. Behind me, the officer stepped inside just enough to continue the conversation. Marcus stayed near the doorway, no longer blocking it. Danielle stood off to the side, the keys still in her hand, but now they didn't look like power. They looked like evidence. Miss Klein addressed Marcus directly. We'll need to document everything that occurred today, including the lock change, the attempted exclusion, and any prior filings. Marcus rubbed his forehead. This is insane. No, I said, standing up slowly, still holding my children close. This is exactly what you set in motion. He looked at me again, frustration mixing with something else, now something closer to realization. You could have just talked to me, he said. I met his gaze evenly. You tried to rewrite ownership without me. That's not what You brought a third party into my house, I continued, my voice still controlled, and handed her keys to something you don't own. Danielle finally spoke, her voice quieter now. Marcus, you said this was already handled. He didn't answer her. Because he couldn't. The officers began asking direct questions, dates, documents, timelines. Marcus's answers came slower now, less certain. Every confident claim he'd made earlier started unraveling under simple verification. Outside, neighbors were still watching. Phones still out. Whatever version of the story Marcus thought he could control was already gone. Within the hour, the tone had fully changed. Marcus wasn't being arrested, but he was being formally documented. Statements taken, actions noted. The beginning of something that wouldn't just disappear. Danielle left before it was over. No argument, no scene. She set the keys down on the entry table quietly, deliberately, and walked out without looking back. Marcus noticed, but he didn't stop her. Because by then, he understood. This wasn't a situation he could talk his way out of. In the days that followed, everything moved exactly where it needed to. My lawyer filed immediately, expanding the fraud report, attaching the incident report, reinforcing sole ownership, and establishing clear boundaries. Marcus tried to push back, but the documents didn't support him. The timeline didn't support him. And now, neither did the witnesses. Neighbors had recorded everything. The officers' reports were detailed. Even the attorney he had visited earlier declined further involvement once the inconsistencies were formally flagged. What he thought was leverage became liability. Legally, the outcome was clean. The house remained mine fully, unquestionably. Additional protections were put in place. And Marcus? He wasn't allowed to make decisions about the property anymore. Not informally, not as a husband, not at all. Socially, the fallout spread just as fast. The neighborhood had seen enough. Not the full story, but enough to understand who had been locked out and who had done the locking. That kind of moment doesn't fade quietly. Inside the house, things settled slowly. The first night after everything, Lucas asked me, "Is Dad going to lock you out again?" I shook my head. No. And this time, that answer didn't carry uncertainty. Weeks later, the house felt different. Not because it changed, but because everything unclear about it had been settled. The locks had been replaced properly, legally. The paperwork had been reinforced. Every document exactly where it belonged. I stood in the doorway one evening, the same place I had been forced away from. Only now, there was no one inside trying to decide if I belonged there. The keys rested in my hand. Not handed to me. Not taken. Owned. And final, Marcus thought locking me out would end it. But it didn't. It forced everything into the open and made sure there was no way back for him. Not to the house. Not to the control he thought he had. Not even to the version of the story he tried to create. Because in the end, the only thing that actually held up was the truth he couldn't change. And by the time he realized that, it was already too late.
So, did he believe his own lie, or was this planned from the start?